Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Age of Warfare podcast. Yes, we're doing it on a Sunday today because Aiden had things to do yesterday, but we're happy to bring you today's show Sunday on a Sunday afternoon. And on today's episode, we got a pretty interesting one for you. We are going to be talking about perhaps one of the most important inventions in history, aka the printing press. So, of course, before we get started, as always, Aiden, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm good. I'm well rested. It's a Sunday, so I don't tend to organise anything else to do on Sundays. So I'm refreshed. Looking forward to this.
All right, yeah, it should be a fun one. For me, man, it's been very busy. I was working up at the printing press, but I've been having a lot of things to do with my horror book. Obviously I won a big contest. Not big. I mean, I'm in a big contest in the horror group, so I'm being focused on that. But I did not forget about you guys. We didn't forget. We just have things to do. But here we are, the printing press, on today's episode of the Age of Warfare. And of course, as always, questions and comments are welcomed. So if you're watching us live, please don't hesitate to leave us a comment and let us know how you're doing, and let us know if you have any questions. So let's get started on today's subject here. The printing press, considered one of the most important inventions because it now the mass the mass media, the mass market of people, mass amount of people to get access to literature. Because before the printing press, only the ultra rich or the monks were able to read books and all that, because the cost of producing books was very expensive.
It's one of the big things that I find interesting about it is, and we see this when we talk about, obviously this meant that obviously if the ultra rich had books, so learning how to read and write, that was something for the rich, and it was the poor people obviously didn't have access to this. However, when you really think about it, they didn't need access to it before then. The reason for the lack of literacy was realistically because there isn't this way of producing these things. They had no need of the reading as well. So it leads to the social revolution that it leads to. It isn't just that now everyone has access to this. It's then people are starting to think, well, if we all have access to this, then perhaps we need to deal with this whole, people now need to start to read to be able to do things. Because you really think about it, before the printing press, realistically, what was there for people to read? Because it's in the days before Protestantism really took hold. So you're working on the Catholic system,
right,
where they're not reading the Bible. It's their priest is reading and disseminating that information to them.
Right, exactly.
And that's the only access, the only time a book's important in their lives.
And not to mention, everyone read, was still reading a papyrus on scrolls, on papyrus paper before then.
Yeah. Yes.
And really, the only ones who needed access to that was scribes and aristocrats, and like you said, the rich.
Yeah, you don't have time to do a lot of historical research when you're trying to get your farm going, really.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're trying to fight a war. You're trying to protect your lands. What we have here is the actual printing press. It's a replica of what the printing press looked like in the 1300s when it was invented.
So this the other thing as well is the Gutenberg. A lot of people date the printing press. It was like into the 1400s, and didn't really become a massive thing until the 1500s. The big thing about that is that wasn't the first printing press. It was a way of doing movable type. It was the movable type that actually made that. That's the first printing press. Was, you think about it, normally if you wanted to copy a book, you'd have to have your scribe there, and he'd be in his library, he'd be mixing his pigments, and you get this fantastic illuminated manuscripts. It takes a long time to do that. So if you can then etch that onto something, and then you can use ink to press that on paper, you can then produce that a little bit easier. The problem is you then have to spend all the time etching that, and then that's a singular thing, so you can only produce that one thing. So you then have to have a plate for every single page of the book. Now, with the invention of the movable type as well, is you don't need a new plate for every page of the book. Obviously, you need to move the type around to create a new plate, but you don't have to produce a specific plate. So the cost of producing it drops dramatically, and then enables this this boom in being able to have things written and produce books as well after this. So it's not just the printing press that's important; it's the movable type. And when those two things come together, you then get this flourishing of knowledge.
Well, yeah. What we have here is an actual picture of Gutenberg himself, Johannes Gutenberg. And we also, Anthony Castro, the Bad Rabbit himself. Thank you for coming on over. And he asks us, isn't it true? During that time, it was frowned upon for women to read and write. Interesting question.
Not really. Actually, it's so you've got the, as I said about the religious angle, is women couldn't be priests, and the priests were generally the ones that did the reading and a lot of the writing. On top of that, you've got professions as well. So doing it wasn't so much about the reading and writing; it was about professions. But learning to read and write for an aristocratic woman, if you go back to sort of the ideas of chivalry in the 1400s, before you get this, women reading and writing was actually quite important, because there was a whole thing in chivalry about sending love letters and notes. So if the woman couldn't read, it kind of stops that happening. So it wasn't so much frowned upon, it's how that happened. And actually, when you look into religion, its dissemination around Europe and the medieval period, new ideas, it didn't often come from the men to the men and going forward. It often came to the women, because the men would be doing looking after the castle and the lands, and they'd be doing all of those types of things, and the women wouldn't be doing that type of business. But what they would do is, because everyone was quite religious, they would then be talking, discussing, and going to church, spending more time on the religious pursuits and looking after people. Often at this time, I think hospitals were mainly based around monasteries, the religious aspect as well. So you get more of a connection from that end. So the religious ideas would then be often, it would be the women who would first encounter these, and they would bring them to their husbands. So Christianity, when Anglo-Saxons being converted to Christianity, actually comes from one of, I think it was the Lord of Kent, his wife, who managed to convince him to convert. So with that, obviously, they were reading and they were writing as well. It's just that the major professions that we see at the time where that was done were generally held by men. So it was a different way in which they interacted with it. But no, it wasn't frowned upon. It was doing it for business purposes would have been frowned upon, but just in general,
it just so happens that it just happened to match the social society norms. There you go. That's what I was looking. And what we have here is a man using the printing press, and this and the process that is done is called block printing. Yes, block printing is what they call it. And it's a little bit of a tangent, Aidan. My first run-in with block printing was ironically Age of Empires 2. There's a technology, it's a technology in Age of Empires 2 that you can research in the monastery that gives you monks 3 extra range. But then there was a historical tidbit saying that monks were the big, monks were the biggest readers in medieval society. So block printing was, it was kind of, it makes sense that block printing was a religious technology, since it was mostly religious figures, who benefited from books and writings and literature and all that.
This religious angle is actually really quite interesting because it's if you think about it now, when you've got people that do a lot of reading, writing, into books and papers and things and research, you think scientists. Now, one of the things in this period is that it is the monks who are the scientists as well. Look at the Cistercians are a good example of this. Our advances in use of water for mills, the making canals, all of that, that's Cistercians, hence the name as well, of things like, I think, a system. Like, it all comes from that same thing. So they were the scientists, and that's where you get this idea of all the reading, writing, and research comes from, because they were the people that did that.
Yep, I got a certification. Oh, never
that's
used.
Really cool.
That's still really cool, Anthony. Hopefully one day you'll be able to actually go out and use it, because I think that's really cool. Although we have although I know in today's time, it's not as useful, but it's still a really cool thing to have, man. So kudos to you. And I actually have something really interesting to show you, Aiden, and anybody watching. This is a bit of a timeline of when of the progress of the printing press. So back in 618, woodblock printing was invented in China. Yeah.
And this the thing is, this is one of the things about technology, that there's never really a definitive that it's because they knew it happened in China, because it was so far away and people didn't know about China as well. So the technologies, you see them invented first, and often it is, especially with things like this, often it is China that you'll see a lot of this technology. But then you get things invented separately as well. One of the most famous examples in human history is the invention of farming. Farming was invented in at least 3 different places, completely independently. And so you get this this idea, because if you take it down to its bare basics, you think you're putting ink onto a flat piece of something, and a way to do that is you just need a thing to put the ink on it. It doesn't take much to go to the next level and go, well, what if I carved all this thing once, and then I could just repeatedly do this thing, and then it pushes it forward. Obviously, you have to have the time and a society that will accept this type of thing, the ability to do these things. And it's one of the other parts about it is it's all very well having a printing press, but until you really, really got a good paper industry going, it's kind of pointless. It's like, yeah, you can print 2 million sheets of paper, but you don't have 2 million sheets of paper, right? Because there isn't that much paper to be able to use as well. Whereas in China, obviously, they had this paper industry to start off with, so they were able to move there further quicker.
Although back in China in 618, they didn't have exactly paper. They did what they call woodblock printing. They printed it on actual wood. And here's another tangent. There's a game called Emperor Rise of the Middle Kingdom, which is a good city building game, right? And the first few mentions, when you want to tax your citizens, you have to gather wood. They do, they connect taxes, and they have wood block printing. You don't go printing paper; it's printed on wood. But then as you progress for the missions, then eventually paper gets invented, and then you have to convert the wood into paper mills. So it's really interesting that it all started with wood block. You're printing it on actual wood, on a block of wood.
Yeah, and if you really think about it, paper is just thin wood. At the end of the day, it's quite interesting actually, going into the paper angle. So in the West, really, we trace that from papyrus, which is literally, it's just thin sheets laid out in sort of weaved, flattened, process happens and stuff, and you have this papyrus. One of the things about using papyrus is it's not really absorbent. It's a wonderful material to use and to write on, but if you use ink, you have to be incredibly careful because you will smudge it, and you have to leave it to dry for a very long time, and you have to use the right inks to be able to have that dry on that thing. Whereas with paper, there's no, if you've got decent paper, it's absorbent. And this is something Anthony will know about, of the weights of paper and the different types of paper,
Right.
and the pens that you'll use on that paper.
Mhm,
That you don't want to use your really good heavy pigment ink pens onto a very absorbent paper, because it'll destroy the paper, but it'll also pull all of the ink out at the same time.
Oh yeah,
So paper is a completely different medium from that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony would know because he does comic books, so Anthony would know that more than even I would. Even though we write books and we get them printed. You have to select your paper type very carefully. So yeah, the same thing applies to here. Now, if you move on later in the timeline, in 1300, China expands woodblock printing technology to movable netters. You start to have movable netters. So basically, this is where block printing comes into play. The block printing that we know more of.
Yeah, this is the movable type thing that I was talking about that allows you to do that. You think of the amount of characters the Chinese has. I think one of the Chinese scripts says, I think there's like no one actually knows the entire alphabet on one of the types of Chinese. It's probably changed since I learned about it, but
and not to mention you got traditional Chinese, and then you got simplified Chinese.
Exactly, yeah. So and the whole idea of the simplified is because of that type of thing. So realistically, where like English, we're talking about 26 characters to start off with. That's just your basic letters. Obviously, there are others.
And then you got, and not to mention, we have something called Old English.
Yep, yeah. Letters like Thorn as well, which should come back. It looks like a P where you've just got a bit too high on the top, and it's I believe it's a TH sound depending on where it is in the word as well. I haven't looked into it for a little while as well, but you do have these other letters as well, but where the modifications come from. So you think Gutenberg is German, so Germany, the umlaut, which is 2 dots above a letter as well. So we modify the letter itself by putting those putting marks around it, but having things with dots is really quite a simple thing. Whereas obviously Chinese characters, the change in the character, you basically just have to have another one as well.
And then but it's funny because in 1300 what you might call it, the block printing was introduced in China, but it didn't come to the Western world until 1423. It took almost a whole more than a century for that technology to actually make it into Europe.
Yeah, and it's that technology, and this is where the question comes from, is where we were starting to do more of these things in the West, is that's around the time we're starting to get some connections. You think we do it's weird way to explain it. So the Silk Road's obviously later, but that connection there becomes prominent later on, but that connection was always there. You think of the Crusades, for example. That leads to a very big connection from the West with the Middle East and all these things. One of the big things about the Crusades is actually chivalry comes from the Islamic scholars in Baghdad. It's actually an Islamic invention, realistically, if you want to put it that. That idea then gets morphed through.
That's good to know, because I always thought chivalry was a European thing. I mean, there's something new every day.
It is now, but it's that modification, those original ideas. So you have one of the other things that people forget is Spain was Islamic for hundreds of years through.
Southern Spain, correct. Yes.
So one of the things you get is the Sufis, the Sufi branch of Islam, and they were very big on keeping records and history and these connections to the wider world, and science was a very big thing. This is where you get the Jewish diaspora, where they end up in Spain as they then come through and then move through France into Germany and then into Poland in the 1900s as well. But you get this, the Sufis were welcoming the Jewish people, how the Jewish diaspora ended up in Spain. And one of the things that then brings knowledge, because you've then got another group of people who have their own ancient laws and scripts. You think of all of the, I'm sure everyone's seen the front of the synagogue with the scrolls and the books that they have there. Tradition, so you get that tradition coming through as well. But when you look through into those more ancient bits, you've got this, obviously, as I said, Baghdad being a centre of learning. That is then a connection to that wider area. And as we've gone into several times, this bit in the middle that keeps changing hands, but it does have connections that connects India and China through into this Islamic world as well, some of the empires that we've been looking at recently. So you get this dissemination of information that comes through into Europe. However, is how much of that was because it was known that this was a thing that could be done, and how much of it was we were already doing similar things, and then Gutenberg comes along and goes, you know what if I just did this, and then invents this as a separate invention. But we don't have that true knowledge of that, because that's not something that history ever really records, unless you have Gutenberg saying, I heard this really good idea that the Chinese do, so I've decided to invent one for Germany. It's like that's not a thing that we have, so we'll never truly know that in general. But there's got to be some sort of influence there.
And Anthony brings up a good point. China in general has so many dialects, just like much like Spanish. I mean, heck, even English has different dialects in English. Look at American and UK English.
Even if you look into the UK, so if you go up sort of around Birmingham area, sort of Midlands into the north as well, you'll find that there are certain bits of, like, saying pants for trousers is actually a thing in that part of the UK as well. It's not exclusively US. It actually has long roots in the UK that was then transported over, and it just stuck in the US while we switched over.
And that's why, and that's why the printing press was a very important invention. That way we can, differentiate between the different dialects of different languages. So, and it's funny because it wasn't until 1476 that the actual Gutenberg press was invented. In 1476, I mean, we're over here talking about the 1300s. But the Gutenberg, the one that became the most popular, that didn't get invented close to the 1500s. That was really late, close to the Renaissance, almost.
Yeah. Well, you say it's close to the Renaissance. It is the cause of the Renaissance, really, when you think about it.
You read my mind. You read my mind right there. I was going to ask you that, but you read my mind. That is the cause of the actual Renaissance, because that's when you start to get books to come out. You start to get art. And for the people who are religious, in 1611, the first version of the King James Bible was printed in 1611.
Yeah, which is why, if you look into religious, it's the Mormons go by the King James, because it is the earliest version. So it hasn't been. Every time the Bible has been sort of, I say rewritten sounds really bad, but it is to an extent rewritten, but the language has been modernized to make it more accessible. You have the NIV, the New International Version, which is one of the most common ones, and that has iterations on it. So you get the wording changes slightly. So if you want to look at the earliest wording in English that is printed, you go for the King James Bible. I've got one of each, and it's a lot of it is, this is just easier to read language, but it means essentially the same thing. Whereas certain bits obviously are changed slightly, partly because the reason that King James was doing that was this is the Stuarts, King James first. is the start of the Stuart dynasty that ends up with a lot of these religious wars in the UK, and our civil war is the Stuarts and what they're doing with the printing press, producing the Bible. And it's this effect on how the religious information is disseminated and how they work with it that actually causes a lot of these issues, as people then, the more books you have, the more chance that people have to read, the more access you have to that thing. It then becomes more important of, well, why can't we read that? Which then comes through from one of the big changes between Catholicism and Protestantism, is the Protestantism is about your relationship with God, whereas within Catholicism you have the priest who's an intermediary for you. So you have something in the church called the intercessions, where the priest will give blessings for those who have died. So it's a very Catholic idea, but you get this in High Church of England as well. But if you look at the word intercession, he's interceding on your behalf because he's the person who is speaking to God on your behalf and on the behalf of those people, because he's clergy. Whereas this whole idea of clergy being a separate class, as soon as you can start reading, it's like, well, if I'm religious and I want to read and I've got this access to this material, it's I can understand that this is the one Bible our villagers had for the last 200 years, and only one person can touch this because it is fragile and it's a very important object at the very least. But if I can just go and pick up a copy, we can save up and we can just go and buy another one. What's stopping us from doing that? And then this is where you start getting into all of those religious aspects coming in as well. Why is it only this religious group that has reading? And then you get pushback as well, and you get this sort of class situation going on, and the education as well. And it highlights the fact that so many of these priests and monks couldn't actually read. They were just told what it was that they were to say, and they'd mumble through. Like Latin, it was one of the big things about Protestantism in the UK, is that even the clergy were illiterate. They were making it up. So people are like, hey, hang on a minute. Now they could read the thing. They're like, that's not what it actually says, mate. Like, what are you doing? Why have we been given this person, this very important aspect of our life, that is going to do that? So you then start getting those questions as well. It starts getting people to question how society is, especially major aspects. And obviously religion was one of the big first parts of that, as you said, the King James Bible.
Now, I was looking up the printing press last night before the show, Aidan. I saw an interesting theory. Now, I think this is more of a conspiracy theory than an actual theory, but here we go.
I love these.
One person, and it's on Reddit, so take that as you may. Okay, but anyway, here's the theory. The theory says that Latin, Latin used to be the main language of Europe back in Roman times. And now one person made a theory saying that once the printing press was released, that led to the death of Latin. That kind of led to the death of Latin, the printing press being invented, because not that you could print, because he said that you could print in other languages, people were not as interested in reading in Latin, because now you can read in English, German, French, you name it. So he says the printing press kind of led to the death of Latin, that Latin was kind of an obsolete language that nobody needed to learn because it was obsolete. It was considered archaic.
So one of the interesting things about this, there's two major types of Latin. Latin I learned was ancient Latin, so I was studying the Romans, where you get something called Vulgate. So you get this later Latin that's used in the medieval period, and this is the lingua franca. And if you wanted to communicate with someone else in Europe, they wouldn't understand your language. And to go back to the dialects thing that we were talking about, and Anthony said about we need to communicate with other people. We need a way of communicating. So a universal language for everyone was the use of Latin. So reading, writing, and learning to speak Latin meant that you could then do all of these things, treaties, and then obviously with religion as well, because as we shouldn't forget that Christianity became big because of the Roman Empire. So the Latin. This then ties back into what I was saying about this rise of Protestantism. It's actually part of the rise of Protestantism that it kills off the use of Latin from that aspect. But there's other parts of society where there is this use of Latin. And as you said, if you can put it into your own language, that's easy enough. However, the big thing about that is if there is more literature in another language, you can then put a translation out of that literature. So you can have it side by side. Think of the Rosetta Stone. We were able to translate hieroglyphics because we knew what the Greek was. Therefore, we could use that to work out what the hieroglyphics were. Now, if you've got a printing press, you can then create this in multiple languages. So that then disseminates this information further. And then you get people who could do translations for you. So they can be a translator. Translators have always existed between the languages, but Latin becomes less important through that aspect. You then get the rise of Protestantism as well, where Latin was kept alive by the Catholic Church. It was seen as part of the Catholic Church. Therefore, the Protestants shied away from using the Latin as well. The rise of Protestantism is caused partly due to the printing press. If you didn't have the printing press and the ability to put out the pamphlets and the ability to put out the quantity of Bibles they were putting out, Protestantism would have just been a minor change in the religion in a small area. It's widespread, people picking it up, it going so wide, was partly due to the printing press. Obviously, and it's no coincidence that Protestantism and the printing press are from the same area of the world as well, and that's how this then gets out as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's sort of true, but there's a lot more aspects.
Yeah,
to it as
I
well.
know. No, like I said, it was more of a conspiracy theory than an actual theory, but it carries a little bit of truth. And actually, we're not going to meet the subject right now because Anthony Castro actually has a question. My English teacher told me that if you master ancient Latin, you can pretty much learn every language on the planet as they draw from that. Is that true? No, I wanna answer that, and you could go ahead and answer. I said you can, to a degree, yes, because Spanish, Italian, Romanian, believe it or not, Romanian, French, and the Romance languages all derived from Latin. You know, Spanish, Italian, French, Romanian, Italian, and I think there was one more that I'm missing. Portuguese, if I'm correct. Yeah, those are considered the Romance languages since they're all derived from Latin. You know, so to a degree, yeah, you could learn those languages pretty easily. Although I still find Romanian to be very strange, but it makes sense why Romania is included. Because Rome had Romania at one point, believe it or not. But I don't think that's necessarily true because you will only learn the Latin languages now because then you have other languages like German and English, and that's considered German. You know, the Germanic. Then you have Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, and Icelandic. Those are considered
Icelandic.
Yeah,
so,
those are Slavic.
Weirdly enough, Finnish is not part of that. That's part of the Finno-Ugric group.
Yeah, I know
as well. So
yeah, but
that's the one that I just wanted to say that because I find that really interesting.
Right. That's Scandinavian. That's Scandinavian. That's the Scandinavian language family. Then you have Croatian. Then you have Croatian, Slovenian, Czech, Hungarian, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian. That's the Slavic. That's the Slavic family. And then of course you got the Arabic languages, which is a whole different family. So you could learn a decent amount of languages, the Romance languages from ancient Latin, but there's just too many other languages you wouldn't even be able to learn. Like I forgot Belarusian is part of the Slavic family as well. Belarus.
So one of the interesting things about this is, as you say, it's the Romance language group that is derived from Latin. And when I was at university, there was a Brazilian woman I was in halls with. I was talking to her about languages, and she spoke multiple different ones. We were talking about the differences between Brazilian and sort of obviously you've got this Spanish Portuguese differences, and how in the New World they're different. We've talked about this before. Yeah, here we are. The Vulgate,
the Romance languages. This is what Anthony was referring to. Which yes, you can learn, Spanish, Romanian. This is the Romance languages. But then, of course, like I said, English you wouldn't be able to learn because English is a dramatic language type.
This is one that I did want to bring up because English is both a Romance language and a Germanic language. So it's split into two. So the best example that I always use this is, so when the Normans invaded, they brought along Norman French. Norman French, obviously, is French, but slightly different. And with that, they then brought their words as well. And the best way to look at it is to look at food, believe it or not. So the average person was still an Anglo-Saxon, so they used the Germanic root words for the names of their animals because they had the animals, and that was their primary focus on it, is the animals rather than the food aspect.
Yeah.
So we have ox, we have like geese, pigs, and you think you just name your average farmyard animals. A lot of those in English, the root is Germanic. However, look at the names of the meat that comes from them. Beef from a cow. It's like, how do you get from cow to beef? Now, cow is root is Germanic, whereas beef is, what's the French for beef? Birth. It is Romance names, and it's because those people at the top wouldn't be dealing with the animals primarily. They'd be looking at the food aspect.
And then here's the Germanic language family tree. You got the Proto-Germanic, the early Germanic. Then you got Western Germanic, which branches out to the Anglo-Frisian, which is English and Frisian, and then Never-Nordic German, which is Dutch and German, and then you got North Germanic, which is Iceland, like I said, Icelandic, Norwegian, Scandinavian, and then East Scandinavian, which is Danish and Swedish, and then East Germanic is Gothic, the Goths.
Yeah, so you have, and this the thing is, you can go back to these roots. Now, if you know enough Latin and you learn these Romance languages, to go back to this person I was talking to about these differences between the languages, she said, once you've learned 2 or 3 in one group of languages, you can easily learn the rest because you can see all these connections, which goes to this point of, if you learn Latin, then you've got a good foundation to be able to learn these languages. Now, English is then your gateway into German because you know enough of the Romance languages that you can get a handle on English. And the bits that you then learn are then Germanic. And because you know that, and you've learned these other languages, learning languages then becomes an easier process. Though it is said that if you have a deeper understanding and knowledge of sort of Romance language and Germanic languages, it can actually be quite difficult to learn Eastern languages just because the language rules are so completely different that it's hard for you because you're so ingrained that when you look at a language, because you're not looking at it as a language, you're looking at it as a language group. Your rules in your head are the base rules. So this goes to the Latin. Whereas if you, when you go to another, you've got to learn another different base group of those. Whereas your average person learning a language is, we use it on a daily basis. It's more fluid. So we're not looking at it as, well, that's a that because this rule says it's that. We're like, well, that's that word because of that. So one thing Anthony brought up is one of the really interesting things about English as well. So his last comment about the goose geese thing.
Here we go.
So English, because of the empire and because it is already mashing together of 2 languages minimum, because obviously you've got Celtic that does appear in English at weird points as well. So the goose geese thing, that's Germanic, that comes from that. But moose, you don't get moose in Europe. Well, you may have done at one point, and then we probably killed them all because that's what we did with all of the animals in the UK. but because Moose comes from North American languages, though the language groups of the First Nations, Canada, it doesn't get pluralized into Nis. There has been some suggestion that we should do that to make the language simpler. And
then,
as English is a fluid language, it
right,
can possibly be a thing. But that is a really, really good reason I want to bring it up. Is this a really good example of how English is weirdly connected to all these languages, especially due to empire.
Right.
You think
and
of
then
things like Turkey,
I also wanted. Then of course I wanted to show Anthony and everyone the Slavic family tree when it comes to languages. So, the Slavic family. Well, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, the Czech Republic, or today Czechia in today's world. Then Slovenia, Slovakia, Poland, Montenegro. Then they got North Macedon over here. Yep. North Macedon, which has a lot of history in itself. Croatia, yep. Bosnia, and I can't pronounce the other one.
Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yeah, yeah. So and then Albania, Kosovo.
Also, just want to point out the Albanian flag is awesome because they kept the bird on their flag and it looks really cool.
So I mean, to really answer Anthony's question, that he was asking before, yes and no. You could, if you learn ancient Latin, yes, and really mostly no, that you can learn every language on the planet.
Here's some irony for you. So we were talking about with Latin being used to be able to communicate with other people. The language for that these days is English. So if you learn ancient Latin, it gives you a good foundation to learn English, and then you learn English, and then you can pretty much speak to anyone because you're going to find English speakers pretty much everywhere because it is such an important language. So while you can't speak their language, you'll be able to communicate in pretty much everywhere in the world if you have a good foundation of English and then some of the other basics. So if you take Romance language, for example, if you know Portuguese and French, there's a lot of the, so Portuguese, French, and English. These are the biggest empires. Like Spain, also massive empire. So if you've got those, they're going to have influences on the local languages as well, which gives you, like I was saying about English, this inroads into learning that language. You can use that as a basis because those languages were so widespread. If you know those languages, your ability to communicate and then learn those other languages is heavily enhanced by this root of Latin. But actually you want to go to Proto-Germanic as well, which then leads you into, this gets into the concept of Aryans and this connection between Indian language and European languages. Things like the words for mother, mother, dog, I've forgotten the other ones, but those are two prominent ones. If you look at all languages in the world, they're all very, very similar and all come from this same root. There is this core language where most language has derived from to a certain extent. There's obviously there are exceptions, but it's if you go into language and you get down to that level of learning that much language and you go into this. There was an interesting guy I used to follow who did know these things, and he could speak some of these proto languages, and it was fascinating to see how you could read some of these words because the root is similar in your own language as well.
Right. And Anthony asks us, what do languages such as Japanese and China derive from? Well, obviously not Latin, because understand, Anthony, that while Latin was the dominant language in Europe back in ancient times, China, it was a whole different universe in the Eastern world. The Eastern world was separate from the Western world. So
if we go to look at that, you go back to the big hotspots of civilization, and where civilization, as we know, is major river valleys. So you've got the Indus River Valley. That's the one in the middle, right? So that now runs. We've done this before because we've looked at these empires. That's Pakistan and India. That's that India. Area. So that then goes into something very interesting about a lost continent, but that's for another episode because that's fascinating.
Right.
But you also have the Fertile Crescent, that's the Middle East. But in the east, you have the Yangtze River. as a major place where civilization flourished, which is a similar type of idea as well. So the way you get that, where you get people living together, this goes back to the formation of societies. We're going back really quite deep into this. Formation of society is, if you are living in a hunter-gatherer tribe, you do one of two things: you hunt or you gather. There isn't much else that you can do. There are some ancillary tasks that you do. Obviously, you need to look after the children. You need to protect your area. You need to go and look for other food. But all of the tasks are based on those things, because that is your primary purpose. You've got to get food. Now, as soon as you have farming and you're living in a settled society, that then allows you to have these ancillary occupations. So when you've got the people farming, you've then got the people in charge of the farming, because they need to oversee all of these farms, and they'll go around helping people out. You then start to get trade, which means then you start getting traders as well. And then religion then starts becoming formalized. So you then get a clergy class. So you get these things that start appearing. Now, if we go right the way back to the printing press thing we were talking about at the beginning,
Right.
that religion and writing aspect is heavily, heavily linked, because of religious writings being one of the ones that are often revered, venerated, and kept throughout time. What I write down as my scrap notes when I'm writing a book isn't going to be, unless I somehow weirdly become a massively famous author at some point, that's not going to be something that anyone's going to want to keep for posterity. Like, my son might keep it at some point if it's something that touched him that I'd written. But generally, if my grandchildren will, they're like, oh yeah, it's nice, but realistically, do we need to keep this? Whereas if it's a major piece of religious writing, you don't have that aspect of, we're going to get rid of this thing. So it keeps the writing flowing forward. So when you get these societies forming in these areas, you need a way of communicating and writing things down, especially with trade. If you look back to cuneiform, the basis of cuneiform is on shopping lists. Our earliest writing in Europe, and Angel will know about this, looking at Crete, Minoa, areas like that, Linear A, Linear B. It's like our earliest writing is literally a shopping list. It's that is the basis of it. It's the cataloguing what you have to do that. So you then start bringing in a foundation of writing to have your religion formalized and your trade formalized. So I dare say the language in the East came out of a formalization through these farming practices around the Yangtze area. So that would be one of the core places of that. But as I've said many times, I'm not particularly good on the Far East. I know some bits as well.
Now, going back to the printing press, we went on a bit of a tangent on languages, but that's okay because that's coincide. Now, what was the first book printed by the printing press? Do you have any guesses about what the first book might have been? That
I used to know this. I'm just going to say the Bible, because quite frankly, it would not surprise me at all.
And it is the Gutenberg Bible, and here's a replica in a museum in New York City. The Gutenberg Bible.
One thing to really note about this is we've got the printing press, but that still looks like someone wrote it by hand and illuminated it. It shows the progression really, really, really well. You've got what you're trying to do is you're emulating what was done by hand as well. One of the interesting ones is when you get to the 1600s with printing press, there's a massive thing in the UK with this is the rise of propaganda as well. It's really interesting in the English Civil War. There's a famous pamphlet called "The World Turned Upside Down." There's actually a pub in Reading called "The World Turned Upside Down." It rise from the Civil War, and it was propaganda about basically the other side were killing and eating babies. You know, standard, my enemy is doing this. But pamphlets became a massive thing. It's just a single sheet with a woodblock, woodcut picture on it. And this is the old, you can tell it's from the 1600s because it's a woodcut. And then you'd have that really obvious script that is from this movable type, but it's a cheaper versions of it. It's by the 1600s. that you can get this more basic machines that will do the same thing, and then you can put out this thing. So it's essentially almost early Facebook post, really, isn't it?
There goes a person. This is the block printing.
Block printing, yeah.
Yep.
So it's really interesting. So Angel, I don't know if you want to see if you can bring up a picture of English Civil War pamphlet. Would be probably the keywords.
I think English Civil War pamphlets or propaganda.
Or propaganda, yeah, either or. If you can find an image of one of those, they're absolutely fascinating.
I think I found a good one here. Let's see. Let's bring it up.
Yeah. So this is it's so good.
I mean, yeah.
It shows obviously the woodcuts and how simple it is. We in the UK, one of the things that most people, especially my age, did in school was lino cutting to create prints. The basic block printing methods and learning how to do that was all part of schooling. And this is the basis they were using for this. But if you look at the type that's used on this as well, we're getting away from, right, this is a very serious business in printing. We're printing books because this is the thing that we can do. By the 1600s, it's reached this level that you're basically doing dog memes. Do you see what I mean? It's like it's that really pushes this through, which is then interestingly connected to how the US then gets this, because obviously it was a colony at the time, and this is where you get all this colonial stuff, and this is the atmosphere in which they're getting this printing press coming through. Obviously, originally they're doing the same thing that everyone else does. We can make loads of Bibles because that was its originally intended purpose, was to disseminate the word of God for a lot of people, but also it is to publish these other things. So you get this this propaganda thing, which is where you then start having like these proclamations and all of this idea, and it comes out of this very thing. Well, the formation of the US of the religious turmoil in Europe that does this. This is this period of time. So they're coming through both with this religious aspect and with this propaganda aspect, and realizing that actually you can use type in this way. It's easy enough to do. It's become cheap enough by the 1600s. That advancement from, you think it's really 1500 when this thing's really got going. 100 years.
I got another good one.
We're making memes. Like humans never change.
Yep, you got the church, you got the parliament, you got against, and so basically the kingdom, the city. So would it be fair that this was the earliest form of the Tories against the Labour Party in the United Kingdom?
Yes, yeah. There's so many similarities.
The Tories. Yeah, I know what the Tories are. Yeah, I do know a little bit about UK politics. I did look it up what Tories are.
But it's the age-old thing. This is where we start. So it's like with Protestantism as well. It's the emancipation of the people from the class system, and it goes back to this. And it was a very 1970s history thing of class struggle, obviously with the communism being a big thing during the Cold War. The left getting linked more to the communist ideals. Proto-communists were around at this time, and this is where you get proto-communism in the UK, which is why several of the big communist meetings for the before the revolution in Russia were in the UK or in London, in fact. And you get this basis of this is so familiar yet so different at the same time, that you can see these things, and along with these images, you then often get this block of text explaining what it is with the wonderful language. If you look at the spelling of city as well, because language wasn't formalized, and so this is the other thing is language doesn't get formalized until a lot later on. You're talking the 1800s before things getting properly formalized. So it is literally, it's like early days of the internet, really, where anything goes. There were no rules, and this is that, but in paper form as well. And it shows, once you have this printing press, it then makes it that anyone can do this. It then ceases to just be, well, there's a massive religious aspect to the civil wars in our country. There's a political aspect, so you can talk about politics. It's people realizing, people being educated as well. It's this dissemination of education and being able to read. So that thing that Anthony was saying about women reading and writing as well, and preventing women from doing those types of things. In later years, those attitudes come up as well, because it's all about control. It's a control aspect of it. If they can't read or write, they can't engage within the world beyond what they are doing at that point. And with the printing press, it did that for everyone, and people understand this at some fundamental level.
Now, is it fair to say, Ethan, that the printing press kind of gave birth to modern politics?
Really, yeah, because if you think about politics before that, politics was just a bunch of the rich people fighting over who had the land and who was in charge of it. And while there would be politicking in the parliaments of the time and the courts of the time, court intrigue as we know it, and that's all very fascinating. However, your average person, whatever, as long as rather they weren't doing that, because when they do that, they come and burn down our farms and then force us to fight the guy whose other farm got burnt down for no particular reason. So the thought was there, that process behind this anger, sort of saying where these ideas of like very left-wing communism and the class system ideas come from. And once you get this printing press, is people are able to express this. These thoughts are still there, but it then makes politics not just those people in the court having a bit of intrigue. It then becomes everyone going, well, here, hang on a minute. If you're taking all of this stuff, why are you taking all of this stuff? Like, what gives you the right to do that as well? Oh, because I've got swords and I've got people to carry these swords, so I can tell you. And like, well, yeah, we've got those as well, which was the basis of peasant revolts, time immemorial. However, this now formalizes it more, that it's not just, why are you taking our stuff? It's, well, we kind of understand this concept now, so what about these other things? If we give you this, you promise this thing, we would like this as well. And you can then disseminate that information. Say it's like, well, yes, we don't like that they're taking it, but we understand what's going to happen.
Because I'm going to tell you something, man. We're going to have to do an episode about propaganda, because some of these propaganda, World War II propagandas, I gotta say, they're pretty symbolic. The propaganda pictures of World War II, the Soviet Union, and not the Germans and all that.
But they had, in the Tate Gallery in London, they had an exhibition of Soviet propaganda throughout the times from World War II. And I used to go to every couple of months. I used to go to the Tate. Well, I'm certainly really posh now, and have a look at those. And it was heavily influenced some of the art I was doing at the time as well. But the propaganda, loose lips sink ships. It's like it's so iconic that you think that you can just. Yeah, as well. That's and the UK ones are just hilarious as well.
Yeah, I mean, and and even the communist ones, like symbolic. The communist ones. I mean, I'm not into communism, but the propaganda kind of looks it looks well done. You can see why a lot of people kind of got drawn into it. You can see how it worked.
Yeah, propaganda at the level that we have it now is it's Nazi Germany, it's Goebbels. He was a master at it, and he goes to this. However, this does connect to what we're talking about, as we were talking about. So obviously, I was saying about the things of war and your question about politics. How is that? It's like the communist revolution never really would have happened unless you had this ability to disseminate this information by being able to
Yeah,
read it
exactly.
and to be able to write it and have it printed as well. Because realistically, when you look at the November Revolution in 1917, it's a peasant revolt, but it would have just remained a peasant revolt as well, because we know that the Russian Empire survived so many peasants' revolts, like any regime through that time. Like any European country, it's like, oh, the peasants revolting, and then the people in charge stayed in charge. But what you end up having is that it isn't just this base idea that goes through, because that can disseminate fairly widely to a town and possibly a province. But until you have this written down of we're doing this and this is what we're going to get at the end, until you've got that written down and being able to disseminate that to other people, and even if not everyone can read, being able to have 1 in 10 read and be able to say, no, look, this is our idea, this is our manifesto, as it were. You can't have that unless you have the printing press. It's what I say, it's the emancipation of everyone who isn't in those upper echelons of society. They can now interact with society as a whole rather than on a subsistence level as well. It gives a voice, essentially.
Exactly, right. Well, anyway, we are over the hour, guys. So that is unfortunately that is the end of another episode. But Aiden, that does give me an idea for the next episode, propaganda.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to
definitely. That's a good follow-up.
Yeah, because in that moment we could talk about propaganda. So yeah, that'll be in 2 weeks, that episode. But this was a fun one, guys. It's a very important one too. If you look at literature, how it's evolved and all that. So I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank Anthony for his questions. Thank you for coming and joining. And for those who might have missed it, you'll be able to watch the replay once we get out of here. And this episode will be uploaded on YouTube as well. So thank you I know we came on a Sunday, but it happens sometimes. We get busy. We have real life and gets involved. But thank you for watching, guys. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. That has been the Gate Aiden Cordier. I am Antius Maximus. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. I hope you all have enjoyed the rest of your weekend. And we'll see you then. Take care, guys.